Welcome to Straight Out of Scripture, a nod to my West Coast roots and a daily dive into who God is and to who we are in Him. Today we are going to discuss the sons of Issachar and knowing your season. Imagine walking through life blindfolded, unaware of the seasons shifting around you. You're planting seeds in winter, waiting for a harvest that can only come in spring. You're trying to rest in a season God is calling you to work. Life can feel like that when we don't discern the seasons that we're in. In 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32, the Bible highlights a tribe, the sons of Issachar, who understood the times and the seasons and knew what Israel should do. They were men of wisdom. They knew how to move in sync with God's divine timeline. And that's not just a story about ancient leaders, it's also a lesson for us today. One of the greatest challenges that we face as believers is moving according to God's seasons and not our own desires or the world's expectations. We often feel anxious to move forward, frustrated with delays, or restless in moments that we should be still. The truth is that God has appointed times for everything under heaven, and when we learn to recognize those divine seasons, we position ourselves to walk in the fullness of His purpose. Think about it. How many times have you tried to rush God? Maybe you've been in a season of waiting and you're eager to get to the next step and you start trying to force doors to open. But it's like trying to bloom in winter. Things will not grow because the environment is not ready. And often we experience frustration because we fail to understand the spiritual timing of things. You may have a promise from God, but if you're trying to bring it to pass outside of the right season, it can lead to failure or burnout. The best example I think to use is, of course, David. He was anointed as king as a young man, but it took years for him to actually sit on the throne. David did not try to force his way into power. He knew his season was coming, but he also knew it wasn't time yet. His faithfulness to God in the waiting was just as important as his reign would be later. If David tried to take the throne prematurely, he would have ruined the process. On the other hand, consider the Israelites wandering in the desert. They were meant to enter the promised land, but because they didn't recognize the season of deliverance, they spent 40 years wandering in a place that should have only been a temporary passage. Their hearts weren't in tune with what God was doing, so they ended up missing the window of opportunity. And the same principle applies to us. God is always moving, His plans are always unfolding, but we have to recognize the season that we're in. Is this your season of preparation, of waiting, of sowing, or of harvesting? Sometimes God is calling us to work and plant seeds even when it seems unfruitful because the harvest comes in a future season. Other times He's calling us to rest in Him and to stop striving and allow God's grace to work. Jesus even rebuked the Pharisees because they didn't know the time of His visitation. They were waiting for a Messiah, but when He stood right in front of them, they missed Him. Don't let that be your story. Don't get so caught up in what to expect that you miss what God is doing in the now. The sons of Issachar knew what Israel should be doing because they understood the times. In our lives, the key to understanding our seasons comes from being in tune with God. So prayer, seeking His wisdom, and surrounding ourselves with spiritual insight allows us to navigate our lives with purpose. God has a plan, and if we walk according to His timing, we'll find ourselves in places of fruitfulness, blessing, and divine alignment. So ask yourself, what season are you in? Are you trying to run ahead of God? Are you frustrated with the season of waiting? Or perhaps you're so focused on future promises that you're neglecting what He's doing right now? Remember that every season has a purpose, and no matter how hard we try, we cannot outrun it. The sons of Issachar knew the times because they sought the wisdom of God, and so should we. So recognize the season, honor the process, and trust that God's perfect timing will come to pass.